15 days ago, my world teetered on the edge of monotony. That Friday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I lay sprawled on the couch, flipping through my photos, hoping to find some spark of joy among the memories. That's when Brian, my husband, entered the room. His face was clouded with an expression so sour it could curdle milk. "I'm done," he muttered, dropping his bag by the door. His words spilled out like a confession. Frustration at his job, his boss, the relentless grind. Burnout, he called it. I listened, offering soft reassurances, stroking his hand as he vented. When he finally trudged off to bed, the room grew eerily quiet. I followed him a while later, my thoughts racing. I tried to stir the embers of something forgotten between us. Playfulness, intimacy. Sliding atop him, I whispered, teasing, hoping to pull him into one of our old role-playing games. But he turned away, murmuring, "Not tonight. I'm too tired." The rejection stung like cold water splashed over a flame. Something inside me snapped. I slipped into a lacy set I hadn't worn in years, a soft lilac bralette and matching panties. I threw on a loose top and shorts, grabbed my keys and drove to Lisa's. My best friend. My confidant. My escape. Lisa opened the door, her auburn hair swept into a messy bun, eyes sparkling like she'd just heard the juiciest secret. We settled in her kitchen, glasses of wine in hand, the weight of my frustrations pouring out. She listened intently, nodding at the right moments, before leaning back with a knowing smirk. "You know," she said, her tone a shade too casual, "we've been in a similar rut. Mark and I have been looking for ways to spice things up. I've been meaning to talk to you about this." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Have you ever thought about swapping?" And blinked. "Swapping?" Lisa's grin widened. "Swing party. Mark and I have one planned. And honestly, I think it's just the thing you and Brian need." Her words hung in the air, thick and heady. My cheeks flushed as my mind raced. Was she serious? I sipped my wine, avoiding her gaze, but my silence only encouraged her. "Come on," she nudged. "It's harmless fun. And between us, I wouldn't mind trying Brian out for a night. He's kind of my type." I nearly choked. But the admission wasn't shocking. I'd always noticed the way Lisa looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. And truth be told, I'd harbored a curiosity of my own. Mark was everything Brian wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a wickedly charming smile that could melt glaciers. The idea of being with him, even once, sent a thrill down my spine. Lisa leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Think about it. No strings. Just an adventure. You deserve it." As I drove home that night, her words echoed in my mind. Was it crazy? Irresponsible? Maybe. But for the first time in months I felt alive. And that was enough. The morning sunlight spilled into the bedroom, soft and golden, as I stirred to the gentle touch of Brian's hands. He was behind me, his chest warm against my back, his fingers tracing lazy, circular patterns over my hips. His lips brushed my shoulder, leaving a trail of kisses that made my skin tingle. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still heavy with sleep. I hummed in reply, enjoying the slow, rhythmic massage he'd started without even waking me fully. It was one of his love languages. Quiet gestures that made me feel adored. For a moment, I let myself melt into him, savoring his touch. But the conversation with Lisa from the night before weighed on my mind, a mix of excitement and trepidation bubbling beneath my calm exterior. I turned to face him, brushing his hair from his forehead. "I talked to Lisa last night," I began, watching his reaction carefully. His brow lifted, but he didn't stop his hands from moving. "Yeah. What about?" I hesitated, then decided to dive in. She suggested we join her and Mark at a swing party. To spice things up. Brian paused, his hand still for the first time. He looked at me, his face unreadable for a moment, before a grin slowly spread across his lips. "And," he asked, his tone light, almost teasing. I bit my lip. "And I think it might not be the worst idea." He raised an eyebrow, leaning back against the pillows, clearly weighing my words. "Is Lisa going to be there?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "She and Mark are hosting it," I said. "She's interested in you, you know." Brian chuckled, his fingers trailing along my arm now. "And you wouldn't mind if I played along with her?" I shook my head, a flush creeping into my cheeks. "Not at all." He considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly, his grin returning. "Okay," he said, his voice easy. "If it's going to help me unwind, I'm in." That afternoon, we found ourselves seated at Lisa and Mark's table, the four of us laughing over glasses of wine. The air was light, but there was an unspoken energy beneath the surface, a current that buzzed between us, growing stronger with every stolen glance. Lisa leaned toward me, her hand brushing mine as she spoke. "So, it's settled. You two are joining us." Brian smiled. His arm draped casually over my chair. "We're in," he said smoothly, the words almost a challenge. Mark, who had been leaning back in his seat, set his glass down with deliberate care. He stood, his movements unhurried but deliberate, his gaze flicking between us. Then, without a word, he reached for the buttons of his shirt, slipping it from his shoulders to reveal the taut lines of his chest. Lisa smirked, clearly unfazed. "Mark," she chided, though there was no mistaking the amusement in her tone. "Why wait?" Mark said, his voice low and confident. He stepped toward Lisa, unbuckling his belt with one hand. "We're all here. Let's start now." The room seemed to hold its breath as he leaned down to whisper something in Lisa's ear, his hand brushing her shoulder. She laughed, the sound light and musical, before turning her gaze to me and Brian. "Well," she said, "what do you think?" The atmosphere in the room thickened as Mark dropped his pants, his steps deliberate as he closed the distance between us. My breath caught, anticipation sparking in my chest. At that same moment, Brian's hand darted toward Lisa, his fingers deftly undoing her top, revealing her flushed skin as she giggled. The energy was electric, no longer just playful but something raw and charged. Mark's hands were on me before I could think. Firm but not rough, they guided me backward until the couch caught my knees, and I sank into it. His weight settled near me, his touch leaving trails of heat along my skin. He leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered something low, a murmur that sent shivers cascading down my spine. I had imagined this moment, more times than I dared admit, in fleeting thoughts, in the quiet moments before sleep. But I never believed it would actually happen. Now, as Mark's presence consumed me, my thoughts spun wildly. This wasn't just an experiment. It was the culmination of a secret desire, one I had suppressed for so long. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, feeling his expertise in every calculated movement. He knew exactly how to make me lose myself, to coax reactions from me that I didn't even know I had. And yet, a small part of me kept comparing him to Brian. Brian, who knew me like no one else did. Who could unravel me with a single look because he understood me, truly. Still, Mark's confidence was intoxicating, a different kind of pull that left me breathless. I let myself get lost in it, the sounds of Lisa's soft laughter and Brian's low murmurs blending into a heady backdrop. Lisa's voice cut through, teasing and playful. "Isn't it divine?" she purred, her words directed at no one in particular. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Every nerve in my body was alight, every movement perfectly calibrated to keep me suspended in that euphoric haze. Mark's hands gripped me tighter, his energy growing more commanding, more deliberate. He took a handful of my hair, gently yet firmly, and tilted my head back. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and full of authority. Mark leaned in close, his movements commanding as he guided my hands to his tools. The energy between us was electric, an unspoken rhythm taking over as I worked, drawing from everything Brian had taught me. Each twist, each precise movement felt natural, effortless, like second nature. Mark's groan of approval sent a flicker of satisfaction through me, a silent affirmation of the skill I had honed over time. The seconds blurred into minutes, the air thick with tension. Just as I thought I had found my rhythm, Mark's hands moved swiftly, pulling me back onto the couch. His intensity didn't falter as he resumed his motions from earlier, each one deliberate, driving me into a state of heightened sensation. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. Words wouldn't come even if I wanted them to. The force and pace left me breathless, my body responding instinctively. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, feeling every deliberate movement and the rush it brought. The room buzzed with murmurs and soft laughter, but all I could focus on was the storm of sensations. And then it happened. A moment I hadn't anticipated, hadn't even thought to discuss. Mark suddenly pulled away, and I felt a wave of warmth spill over me. It wasn't until I glanced down that the realization struck, stark and undeniable. My fingers instinctively reached for the source, and when I looked at my hand, I saw it, thick white mayonnaise dripping down my skin. My heart raced as I looked up, catching Brian in my peripheral vision. His focus was on Lisa, who now lay sprawled across the couch. Her stomach glistened with the same telltale streaks of mayonnaise that marked my own skin. Brian met my gaze, his expression unreadable but intense, the weight of the moment hanging between us. The room felt charged, the energy shifting into something both unspoken and undeniable. I couldn't tell whether I felt exhilaration or disbelief, or perhaps a dizzying mix of both. When Brian's gaze locked on mine, confusion clouded his features. His brow furrowed, his attention drifting to Mark, and then the truth seemed to dawn. His voice was sharp, breaking the tense silence. "Didn't you get it out?" he demanded, his words slicing through the charged atmosphere. Mark's face flushed a deep red, his usual confidence wavering. He hesitated, his lips parting as if to respond, but the guilt in his expression was answer enough. I saw the flicker in Brian's eyes, the moment his control began to unravel. My pulse quickened, my instincts screaming to intervene before things spiraled. "Brian, stop," I pleaded, stepping in front of him. "It's fine. Nothing happened, I promise." My voice rose, desperate to defuse the situation. But he wasn't hearing me. His voice boomed, filled with anger and disbelief. "Don't lie to me. Can see it. It's leaking right there." He pointed toward the damp tissue I had hastily used, the evidence glaring in the dim light. "I'm not lying," I shouted back, the strain in my voice betraying the panic simmering beneath my surface. "It's fine, Brian. Nothing's wrong." The room felt like it was closing in, the tension suffocating. Lisa and Mark stood frozen, their shock painted plainly across their faces. Mark's lips moved silently as if searching for the right words, but none came. After what felt like an eternity, Brian's fury ebbed just enough for him to step back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. His chest heaved as he tried to regain his composure. "I need air," he muttered, pacing toward the window. Taking the momentary reprieve, Lisa grabbed my hand. "Come on," she whispered, leading me toward the bathroom. Under the harsh glow of the bathroom light, we stood side by side, the water cascading over us as we washed away the evidence of the night. The warm stream soothed my skin, but my thoughts raced. "Do you have the pill?" I asked Lisa, my voice trembling with urgency. She hesitated, her expression shifting from concern to regret. "I don't. Mark usually handles that," she said, glancing at me with worry. My stomach tightened, the realization hitting me like a wave. I nodded numbly, finishing up quickly. My mind was a blur as I toweled off and slipped into fresh clothes. Brian and I left shortly after, the drive home punctuated by tense silence. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. At home I couldn't sit still. My thoughts raced with every passing second. I had only 48 hours to fix this, but Brian seemed intent on keeping me close. "Make something for dinner," he said abruptly, his tone leaving no room for argument. I nodded, retreating to the kitchen while my mind screamed for a solution. As I chopped vegetables and stirred the pot, I couldn't shake the sensation, something warm and unsettling building deep within me. Every 10 minutes, I felt a faint release, a reminder of the mistake I couldn't undo. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus on the mundane task of cooking. But with each passing minute, the weight of the situation pressed down harder. I needed a plan, and fast. The night passed in a haze of anxiety and exhaustion, my mind replaying the events over and over. I couldn't settle, my body betraying me as I felt the dampness seep through the sheets. Each time it happened, I woke with a start, silently cursing the sensation. I moved carefully, not wanting to disturb Brian, who lay beside me, snoring softly. Slipping out of bed, I tiptoed to the bathroom. My trembling fingers pulled at the waistband of my soaked underwear, my heart pounding in the quiet of the night. I pressed the fabric tightly against myself, desperate to stop the constant, humiliating trickle. But no matter what I did, it seemed unstoppable. I returned to bed each time with fresh clothes, praying Brian wouldn't stir or ask questions. But sleep never came easily. My thoughts were a relentless storm, and the clock on the bedside table seemed to mock me with every glowing minute. When dawn broke and the soft light crept into the room, I couldn't wait any longer. Brian was still deep in slumber, his arm draped lazily across the sheets. I slid out from under his arm, careful not to wake him, and threw on the first clothes I could grab. Grabbing my keys, I made my way to the pharmacy, the cool morning air a stark contrast to the heat of my panic. The walk down the brightly lit aisles felt surreal, my heart racing as I scanned the shelves for what I needed. Birth control pills. I grabbed a pack, paid quickly, and hurried outside. Leaning against my car, I popped 2 pills from the blister pack and swallowed them dry, the bitterness clinging to my tongue. My breathing steadied slightly, but I knew I needed more reassurance. I drove straight to the hospital, where the sterile white walls and fluorescent lights seemed to close in on me. When the nurse called my name, I explained everything quietly, avoiding her eyes as I detailed what had happened and what I was experiencing. She listened without judgment, her calm demeanor a small comfort. After a thorough check, she smiled kindly. "You're fine," she said. "What you're noticing is just residual effects from last night. It's normal, nothing to worry about." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the weight of everything that had transpired. I thanked her, picked up a few groceries to mask my early morning excursion, and headed home. Brian was in the living room when I returned, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. He barely glanced up as I unpacked the bags. "Went grocery shopping," I said casually, hoping my voice sounded normal. He only nodded, taking another sip. I exhaled slowly, thankful he didn't ask for more details. But even as I busied myself with mundane tasks, I couldn't shake the lingering tension. The relief was fleeting. There were still so many emotions to untangle, and I wasn't sure how to move forward. Today marks 15 days since that night, and as I sit here reflecting on everything, I can't help but feel a pang of regret. Writing this isn't easy, but I feel it's important to share the truth about what happened and the impact it left on me. First and foremost, I want to say this. I do not recommend anyone go through what I did. What seemed like an exciting escape at the time turned into a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Panic, guilt, and a vulnerability I wouldn't wish on anyone. The choices we make in moments of impulsivity can leave ripples far longer than we imagine, and I've learned that lesson the hard way. To anyone listening or reading this, I'm not promoting or glorifying these actions. This story is shared for entertainment and reflection only, not as advice or encouragement. Please take it as a cautionary tale. Looking back, I realize how much this experience tested the relationships in my life. Lisa and I are still best friends, though our bond has shifted in unexpected ways. We've grown closer, more open, and, in a strange sense, more comfortable with ourselves, sometimes literally, as we found we can hang out without even worrying about what we're wearing. But even in that ease, there's a lingering understanding of the line we crossed. As for Brian, our relationship has survived. And dare I say, improved. That night could have torn us apart, but instead, it forced us to confront parts of ourselves and our relationship that we hadn't before. We've rebuilt with more honesty and trust, and for that I'm grateful. We've decided to remember that night as a mistake, one we're determined not to repeat. I'm okay now, but the journey to get here wasn't easy. Writing this has been cathartic in some ways, and I hope it serves as a reminder that our choices carry weight. Thank you for listening to my story. Please don't repeat our mistakes.